In the back of a dusty saloon kitchen, a little girl scrubbed pots bigger than her arms, her tears lost in the steam. They called her the cook girl. That's it. No name, no family, just hands that were never clean and eyes that were always empty. She was a ghost in the clatter and noise, a fixture nobody ever really saw, until a man named Caleb Wyatt walked in. He was a rancher, a man with shoulders as wide as a barn door, and a silence that hung on him like a shroud. He didn't come to town much. The memories were too loud. But tonight, something pulled him in. Maybe it was the chill in the air, or the deeper chill in his bones that never seemed to leave. He took a seat at the counter, ordered a coffee he didn't want, and that's when he saw her. He saw the way her small body flinched when the saloon keeper barked an order. He saw the faint, dark bruises on her arms, and he saw the tears she tried so hard to hide in the steam rising from a pot of boiling water. Something inside his chest, a thing he thought had turned to stone years ago, cracked. He waited, watching. The saloon keeper, a greasy man named Fitch, with a sneer permanently etched onto his face, shoved another pot into her hands. "Faster, girl! These ain't gonna wash themselves." Caleb stood up. The scrape of his chair was the only sound in the suddenly quiet room. He walked over, his step slow and heavy. He looked down at the girl, then his eyes, hard as granite, met Fitch's. "What's her name?" Fitch laughed, a nasty grating sound. "Don't got one, just girl." "What's it to you, rancher?" Caleb ignored him. He knelt down, so his face was level with hers. "Who are your people, child?" he asked, his voice softer than anyone in that room had ever heard it. She just shook her head, flour and soot smudged on her cheeks. "Ain't got none," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Those 3 words hit Caleb like a physical blow. He knew that feeling, the gnawing emptiness of having no one. He'd buried his wife, Martha, 5 years back. Buried his heart right alongside her. His ranch was just a collection of quiet rooms and dust motes dancing in the sunlight, a place where the only sound was the wind howling its lonely song. Fitch stepped closer. "You got business with my help, Wyatt?" Caleb rose to his full height, dwarfing the other man. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of a coming storm. "She's coming with me." Fitch's eyes widened, then narrowed in disbelief. "The hell she is. She's mine. Got a debt to work off." "She's a child," Caleb said, the words like chips of ice. "She owes you nothing." He reached into his pocket, not looking away from Fitch's greedy eyes. He threw a handful of coins on the dirty floor. They scattered, gleaming in the lamplight. It wasn't payment. It was a statement, an insult. While Fitch scrambled for the money, Caleb extended his hand to the girl. "Come on!" She looked from his calloused hand to his steady eyes. For a second, she hesitated, a lifetime of fear holding her in place. Then, her small, trembling hand, still damp from the dishwater, slipped into his. He closed his fingers around hers, and without looking back, he led her out of the saloon and into the cold night air. The walk to his wagon felt a mile long. She clutched his hand like a lifeline, her small steps hurrying to keep up with his long stride. He didn't say a word, just held on tight, as if he was afraid she might blow away in the wind. But as they left the dim lights of the town behind, Fitch stepped out of the saloon's shadow, his face twisted with rage. He didn't yell. He just said it, his voice carrying on the prairie wind, a cold promise that wrapped around them both. "You don't know what you've done, rancher," Fitch hissed into the darkness. "She ain't just a girl. You've stolen property, and my employer, he don't take kindly to thieves." Caleb didn't stop. He just lifted her into the wagon, a strange, cold dread coiling in his stomach. He'd come to town to escape his loneliness, and now he was riding away with a child who seemed to be at the center of a storm he couldn't yet see. The ranch house was cold when they arrived, the embers in the hearth long dead. Maisie, as he'd learned her name was on the ride home, stood shivering in the doorway, clutching the threadbare shawl she wore. She looked so small, so lost in the large, empty room. Caleb moved with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. He stoked the fire, its hungry flames quickly chasing the shadows back into the corners. He lit a lamp, the warm glow revealing the simple, worn furniture of his life. He cooked her eggs and fried some bacon, moving around the kitchen that had felt too big for one person for so long. She sat at the small wooden table, watching his every move, her eyes wide and wary. When he placed the plate in front of her, she stared at it as if it were a mirage. Then she ate, fast and desperate, like an animal that hadn't seen food in days. Caleb just watched, the ache in his chest growing with every bite she took. He showed her to the small spare room. It had been meant for a child once, a long time ago. The bed was covered with a quilt Martha had stitched herself, the colors faded but still beautiful. Maisie touched it gently, her fingers tracing the patterns as if it were made of spun moonlight. She looked up at him, a question in her eyes. This, for me? It's yours, he said, his voice thick. You're safe here. Later that night, long after the girl had fallen into an exhausted sleep, Caleb sat in his old rocking chair, the fire crackling softly. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the quiet of presence, not absence. He could hear her soft breathing from the other room. He was staring into the flames, lost in thought, when a tiny sound made him freeze. A whimper, followed by a choked sob. He got up and moved silently to her doorway. Maisie was tossing in the bed, trapped in a nightmare. Her hands were clenched, and she was muttering something he couldn't understand. But around her neck, something caught the firelight. A small, tarnished silver locket, hanging from a thin leather cord. She clutched it, even in her sleep, her knuckles white. He'd seen it before, glinting under her collar at the saloon, but hadn't thought anything of it. Now it seemed different, important. He fought the urge to get a closer look. It wasn't his place. He turned to leave, but as he did, she cried out, a single, sharp word. No! Don't take it! He stepped back into the room, gently touching her shoulder. Maisie, you're dreaming. You're safe. Her eyes flew open, wide with terror. For a moment she didn't see him. She saw the nightmare. Her hand flew to the locket at her throat, her body trembling. He's coming, she whispered, her voice shaking. He's coming to get it. Who's coming, Maisie? Caleb asked gently. Fitch? She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. Not him. The other one. The one who owns it. She was looking past him, at the dark window, as if she expected to see a face peering in. Caleb felt a chill crawl up his spine that had nothing to do with the night air. Fitch's words echoed in his mind. My employer. He sat on the edge of her bed until her breathing evened out, and she drifted back to a calmer sleep. He looked at the locket again, nestled against her collarbone. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a key to whatever nightmare she was living in. As he watched her sleep, he noticed a faint pattern on the back of the locket, where it had turned over. He leaned in closer, his eyes straining in the dim light. It wasn't just a pattern. It was a symbol, a carefully carved brand of a stylized hawk, its wings spread wide. And Caleb's blood ran cold. He knew that symbol. He hadn't seen it in years, not since before Martha died. It was the brand of the Blackwood Rail Company, the ruthless outfit run by a man named Elias Thorne, a man who had tried to steal this very land from Martha's family years ago, a man Caleb thought he'd never have to deal with again. What in God's name was a 12-year-old orphan girl doing with the brand of the most dangerous man in the territory around her neck? The next morning broke clear and cold. Maisie was quiet, the shadows of her nightmare still clinging to her. She tried to make herself useful, following Caleb around the ranch, her eyes constantly darting toward the horizon as if expecting an army to appear. He tried to get her to talk about the locket, but she just shook her head, her hand flying to her throat protectively. The fear in her eyes was so profound that he didn't push it. Not yet. He was chopping wood when he heard the riders, 3 of them. They weren't thugs. One of them was Sheriff Brody, a man Caleb had known for years. The other 2 were his deputies, and leading them looking smug and triumphant, was Fitch. "Caleb Wyatt!" the sheriff called out, his voice grim. "I'm here on official business." Caleb rested his axe, his knuckles white. "What business, Brody?" "The girl," the sheriff said, avoiding his gaze. "Fitch here has filed a formal complaint. Says you abducted his indentured servant." "She's a child, not a servant," Caleb growled. Fitch smirked from behind the sheriff. "Tell him, Sheriff. Show him the paper." Sheriff Brody sighed, a man clearly unhappy with his task. He pulled a folded document from his saddlebag. "Fitch has a contract, Caleb, signed by a traveling magistrate. It gives him legal guardianship of the girl, in exchange for settling her parents' debts." Caleb stared at the paper, then at Fitch's leering face. It was a lie. It had to be. "Her parents? Died of fever on the trail a few years back," Fitch said smoothly. "Left her with nothing but a mountain of debt. I was good enough to take her in, give her a roof and food. She owes me, Wyatt. The law says so." Maisie had crept out onto the porch, her face pale with terror. She saw the document in the sheriff's hand and let out a small, choked cry. "This is nonsense, Brody," Caleb said, his voice dangerously low. "You can't enforce this." "My hands are tied," the sheriff said, his face a mask of regret. "The paper is legal. I have to ask you to return the girl to her rightful guardian." "No," Caleb said. The word was flat. Final. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Don't make this difficult, Caleb. I don't want to, but I'll have to arrest you for theft and obstruction." Fitch's grin widened. He had him. He had won. Caleb looked at Maisie, cowering on the porch, her eyes pleading with him. He looked at the legal paper that was nothing but a cage, and he looked at the sheriff, a good man trapped by a bad law. He knew he couldn't win a fight against the law. Not head on. "All right, Brody," Caleb said, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "You win! Give me until sundown. Let me get her things together. Say goodbye proper." The sheriff looked relieved. "Sundown, Caleb. I'll have my deputy wait at the edge of your property. Don't try anything foolish." They turned and rode off, leaving Fitch looking momentarily confused, his victory not as immediate as he'd hoped. As they disappeared over the rise, Caleb turned to Maisie. Her face was a mess of tears and disbelief. You're giving me back?" Caleb strode onto the porch and knelt in front of her. He took her small shoulders in his big hands. "Never," he said, his eyes burning with an intensity she'd never seen. "We're not giving up. We're running." He glanced back at the road, then looked at the locket at her throat. "But first, you have to tell me everything. What is on that locket, and why does a man like Elias Thorne want it?" Her eyes went wide with shock. Not just because he'd suggested running, but because he'd said the name from her nightmares, the name her parents had whispered in fear right before they died. How do you know that name?" she breathed. The dam of her fear finally broke, and the whole story came pouring out. Her parents weren't poor migrants. They were cartographers, map makers. They had been hired by a consortium to secretly survey the new territories for a planned railway expansion. But they had found something they weren't supposed to find, something that proved the powerful Elias Thorne, owner of the Blackwood Rail Company, was a fraud. He was building his empire on stolen land, using forged documents and brutal intimidation. Her parents had created a new, true map documenting Thorne's crimes, and for their safety, they'd encoded it, shrunk it down using a special photographic process, and hidden the tiny negative inside the locket. The locket was their proof, their weapon. Thorne found out. He sent men after them. Her parents had died, not from fever, but from running. Before her father died, he'd given her the locket and made her promise to never let anyone have it. He'd told her to find a safe place, to lose herself. He'd hoped Fitch's saloon in a backwater town would be the last place Thorne's men would look. Fitch wasn't just a saloon keeper. He was an informant, paid to keep an eye out for runaways and report anything unusual. He must have seen the locket and recognized the Blackwood brand,
realizing he had a golden goose in his kitchen. He was just holding her until Thorne's men came to collect her and the evidence that could destroy him. Caleb listened, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't about a debt. This was about a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power in the territory. He looked at the small girl in front of him. Not an orphan, but a witness. A keeper of a secret that could get them both killed. He glanced at the sun, already starting its slow descent. The deputy was waiting. Sundown was coming. "Get your shawl," Caleb said, his voice grim and resolute. "We're leaving now. We'll go east, through the Badlands. They won't expect that." He moved quickly, grabbing a rifle from the rack above the fireplace, stuffing a saddlebag with dried jerky, a canteen of water, and a box of cartridges. Maisie ran to her room and came back, not just with her shawl, but with the quilt from the bed clutched in her arms. It was the first beautiful thing she had ever owned. Caleb didn't have the heart to tell her to leave it. He just nodded, his jaw set. They slipped out the back of the cabin, heading for the stables hidden in a small ravine behind the house. The main barn was too exposed.
He saddled his steadiest horse, a big roan named Atlas. It would be a tight fit for both of them, but they had no choice. As he cinched the saddle, a sound made him freeze. It wasn't the deputy. It was the distinct, sharp crack of a rifle, and it came from the direction of the main road. Another shot followed, then silence. A terrible, heavy silence. They had killed the deputy. Thorne's men weren't waiting for sundown. They weren't waiting for the law. They were here. Caleb grabbed his rifle, pushing Maisie behind him. "Get in the stable. Stay down and stay quiet, no matter what you hear." He crept to the edge of the ravine, peering over the top. He saw them. 5 of them, spread out in a line, advancing on the cabin. They weren't deputies. These were hard men, hired guns, their faces grim, their rifles held at the ready. Leading them was a man in a fine black coat, his face cold and impassive. Caleb recognized him from wanted posters. His name was Silas Kane, Thorne's lead enforcer, a man known for leaving no witnesses. Kane waved his hand, and 2 of his men broke off, circling around toward the ravine, toward the stables. They knew he had another way out. They were cutting off his escape. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. This was no longer a rescue. It was a siege. He was trapped, with a little girl and a secret that was about to bring a war right to his doorstep. He looked back at Maisie, huddled in the darkness of the stable, clutching that quilt like a shield. Her eyes were wide with a terror that mirrored his own. He was just one man, against 5. He had no plan, no allies, and the sun was beginning to set. He had a choice to make. He could try to bargain, to give them the locket in exchange for Maisie's life. But he knew men like Kane. They wouldn't honor any deal. They would take the locket and put a bullet in both of them to tie up loose ends. Or he could fight, a hopeless, desperate stand. He checked the load in his rifle. There were 7 rounds, 5 men outside, plus Kane. The math wasn't good. He heard the crunch of boots on gravel getting closer to the ravine. The 2 men were almost on top of them. He had seconds to act. He looked at Maisie, her small face illuminated by a crack of light through the stable boards. He saw the trust in her eyes. She believed he could save her. And in that moment, Caleb Wyatt, the lonely rancher who thought he had nothing left to live for, found his reason. He raised the rifle to his shoulder, took a steadying breath, and aimed at the space just beyond the stable door. He wasn't going to let them take her. Not while he was still breathing. The first shot shattered the evening quiet. But it wasn't Caleb's. It came from the house. A window exploded outwards, and one of Kane's men dropped to the ground, clutching his leg. Everyone froze, looking towards the cabin in confusion. Caleb stared, his mind racing. Who was in there? Then he remembered. The old hunting rifle Martha kept hidden under a loose floorboard in the pantry. He had forgotten all about it. But how? The second shot was his. He took advantage of the confusion. firing at one of the men circling towards the ravine. The man grunted and stumbled back, giving Caleb the precious seconds he needed. "Stay here!" he yelled to Maisie, and he burst from the stable, firing again, running low and fast toward the back of the cabin. He had to get inside. He had to find out who his mysterious ally was. He kicked open the back door and dove inside, rolling behind the kitchen table as a bullet splintered the wood where his head had just been. The cabin was filled with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. He looked up, and his heart stopped. It was Maisie. She wasn't in the stable. She must have doubled back, slipped into the house while he was watching Kane's men. She was standing by the pantry, holding Martha's old rifle, a weapon that was almost as big as she was. Her face was pale, her knuckles white, but her eyes were blazing with a fierce, desperate courage. She had fired through the window. She had saved him. "I told you to stay put!" he yelled, a strange mix of terror and pride surging through him. "They were going to kill you!" she cried back, tears streaming down her soot-stained cheeks. "I couldn't let them!" There was no time to argue. Kane's men were recovering from the shock, starting to lay down, suppressing fire on the cabin. Bullets ripped through the thin wooden walls. Windows shattered. This cabin, his sanctuary of solitude, was becoming a death trap. "Get down!" he shouted, pulling her to the floor behind an overturned cast-iron stove. "We need a plan. What do we do?" she whispered, trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. Caleb looked around the besieged room. They were pinned, but then he saw it, the root cellar. The door was in the floor, hidden beneath a bearskin rug. It was a long shot. The tunnel was old and led out to a dry creek bed 100 yards from the house. He didn't even know if it was still stable, but it was their only chance. "When I give the signal," he said, his voice low and urgent, "we run for that rug. You go first." He looked her in the eye. "Don't stop, no matter what." He took a deep breath, reloaded his rifle, and then did something crazy. He grabbed an oil lamp from the mantelpiece, lit it, and hurled it through the broken front window. It shattered against the porch, and flames erupted, spreading quickly up the dry wood. It was a desperate gambit. Burn his own home to create a diversion. "Now!" he roared. They scrambled across the floor as the men outside shouted in alarm, distracted by the sudden blaze. Caleb ripped the rug aside, wrenched open the heavy wooden door, and shoved Maisie down into the darkness. "Go! Go now!" He fired 2 more shots out the back window to keep their heads down, then swung himself into the cellar, pulling the heavy door shut just as bullets tore through the floorboards above him. Darkness swallowed them. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and fear. They could hear the muffled shouts of the men above, and the terrifying roar and crackle of their home burning to the ground. They stumbled through the narrow, collapsing tunnel, Maisie clutching his hand, the locket bouncing against her chest. When they finally burst out into the cool night air in the creek bed, they didn't stop. They ran. They ran until their lungs burned and the light from the fire was just a faint, angry glow on the horizon. Caleb had lost everything. His home, his ranch, the last physical pieces of his life with Martha. All of it was gone, turned to ash and smoke. He collapsed by a rocky outcrop, pulling Maisie down with him. She was crying silently, her body shaking with exhaustion and shock. He held her tight, the old quilt she'd saved wrapped around her. He had nothing left in the world but this terrified little girl, a single rifle, and the clothes on his back. He looked up at the stars, cold and distant. He was a fugitive, hunted, homeless. Fitch's words came back to him again. "You don't know what you've done." He was starting to understand. He hadn't just saved a girl. He had adopted her war. And as he looked at the smoldering ruin of his past, he knew this was no longer just about protecting her. This was about vengeance. For his home. For his wife's memory, which Thorn had desecrated. For Maisie's parents. He looked down at the girl curled against his chest. She had stopped crying and was looking up at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "He won't stop, will he?" she whispered. "No," Caleb said, his voice raw. He won't. He gently touched the locket, so we have to stop him first. They traveled for 2 days through the harshest part of the Badlands, a desolate landscape of cracked earth and twisted rock formations. Caleb pushed them hard, knowing Kane's trackers would be skilled. He moved by instinct, using the sun and stars, choosing paths that left the faintest trail. Maisie, despite her fear and exhaustion, never complained. She was tougher than she looked, a small, resilient weed that had learned to grow in stony ground. During the cold nights, huddled together for warmth, she told him more about the locket. It wasn't just a map. It contained her father's journal entries, detailing every bribe, every threat, every crime he had witnessed Thorne commit. It was a complete indictment, enough to bring down his entire empire. But it was useless unless they could get it to someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated, someone with the power to act. The territorial governor, Caleb said, the idea forming in his mind. Governor Hayes. He's a hard man, but they say he's honest. If we can get to the capital, Prescott, and show him this. It was 100 miles away. 100 miles of open country, with Kane's hunters somewhere behind them. On the third day, their luck ran out. They were low on water and crossing a wide exposed basin when Caleb saw the dust cloud on the horizon. It was faint, but it was moving too fast to be a dust devil. It was riders, and they were closing in. There was nowhere to hide, no cover, just flat, sun-baked earth. We can't outrun them, Caleb said, his voice grim. He helped Maisie off the horse. Take Atlas, he said, handing her the reins. Ride north. Don't stop. Don't look back. Her eyes filled with tears. No, I'm not leaving you. You have to, he insisted, pressing the reins into her hand. The locket is more important. Get it to Prescott. Find the governor. Do you understand? He was going to make a stand. Buy her time with his own life. She shook her head, her face stubborn. My parents died for that locket. I'm not going to let you die for it, too. And then she did something that stunned him. She reached up, unclasped the leather cord, and pressed the locket into his hand. You take it, she said, her voice shaking but firm. You're faster. You can make it. Before he could argue, she slapped Atlas on the rump. The horse, startled, bolted, but not north. It galloped away in the opposite direction, a perfect decoy. The riders in the distance would follow the horse, leaving Maisie and Caleb standing alone, exposed and on foot. It was a brave, foolish, beautiful sacrifice, and it had doomed them both. The riders were closer now. He could make out 4 of them. They were fanning out, creating a perimeter. Caleb raised his rifle, knowing it was useless. He and Maisie stood back to back, a tiny island of defiance in a vast, empty sea. This was it. This was the end of the line. But as the riders got closer, Caleb saw something strange. They weren't Kane's men. They were natives, a war party by the look of their markings. They circled them once, their faces like stone, their rifles held ready. Caleb didn't move a muscle. He knew one wrong move would be their last. The leader, a man with a jagged scar across one eye, dismounted and walked toward them. He stopped a few feet away, his dark eyes studying Caleb, then Maisie. He pointed a finger, not at them, but at the locket Caleb was still clutching in his hand. He spoke, his voice low and gravelly, in a language Caleb didn't understand. But the meaning was clear. He wanted the locket. Caleb's mind raced. He was caught between 2 fires. Kane's men behind him, and this war party in front of him. He shook his head, closing his fist tighter around the locket. The warrior's eyes narrowed. He barked an order, and the other riders raised their rifles, aiming directly at Caleb and Maisie. It seemed they had escaped Silas Kane only to die at the hands of strangers. But then Maisie spoke. It was just one word, soft and hesitant, from the tribe's language. A word for friend. The lead warrior froze. He stared at her, his expression shifting from hostility to utter disbelief. He said something to her, a question. Maisie, trembling, responded with another few words. A slow, halting conversation began. Caleb watched in stunned silence as this little girl, who he thought was just a lost orphan, communicated with their captors. After a few tense minutes, the warrior turned to Caleb. He spoke in broken, heavily accented English. "Where did she learn our words?" I I don't know," Caleb stammered. The warrior looked back at Maisie. "Who are you, child?" Maisie took a deep breath. "My mother. She was your people. She was taken when she was a girl. Her name was Morning Dove." A wave of murmurs went through the other riders. The leader stared at Maisie, his hard eyes searching her face. He saw the shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw. He looked at the locket in Caleb's hand, as if seeing it for the first time. He asked her another question in his own tongue. She nodded and told him the story her mother had told her. The locket hadn't been made by her father. It had belonged to her mother. It was a relic of her people, given to her by her own father, the chief, before she was stolen away by settlers. The hawk symbol wasn't the brand of the Blackwood Rail Company. It was the other way around. Elias Thorne, in his arrogance, had stolen the sacred symbol of their tribe and twisted it for his own greedy purposes, branding it on his stolen land. The warrior with the scar reached out and gently took the locket from Caleb's hand. He turned it over and over, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at Maisie, and his stony face softened. "Your grandfather," he said, his voice thick with an emotion Caleb couldn't place. "He searched for Morning Dove until the day he died." He placed a hand on his own chest. "My father was your grandfather. Morning Dove was my sister." The world tilted on its axis. This man, their captor, was Maisie's uncle. She wasn't an orphan after all. She had people. She had a family. She was standing right in the middle of them. The reunion was a strange and solemn affair. The warriors, who moments before had been ready to kill them, now looked at Maisie with a mixture of awe and reverence. Her uncle, whose name was Keem, explained that Thorne hadn't just stolen their land. He had systematically tried to wipe them out, driving them from their ancestral homes. The locket, with its proof of Thorne's fraud, was more than just legal evidence. It was the key to restoring their people's honor and reclaiming their home. They were no longer fugitives running from an enemy. They were allies marching toward one. Kem and his warriors guided them through secret paths in the Badlands, leading them to a hidden encampment nestled in a deep canyon. It was a place of refuge for the last remnants of his tribe. They were given food, water, and fresh horses. For the first time in days, Caleb and Maisie could breathe. That night, sitting by a communal fire, Keme laid out a plan. A direct assault on Prescott was suicide. Thorne owned the politicians and the lawmen. The governor was honest, but he was surrounded by Thorne's spies. Handing him the locket would be a death sentence. It would be intercepted before it ever reached his desk. "Thorne is planning something big," Keem said, staring into the flames. "A celebration. In 3 days, he's hosting a gala in Prescott to celebrate the completion of his railway line. The governor will be there. All the important people in the territory will be there. He's going to announce his plans to run for senator." Caleb saw it instantly. He'll feel safe there, surrounded by his own power. "Exactly," Kem agreed. "It is the one place he will be vulnerable. We won't go to the governor. We will bring the truth to everyone. We will expose him in front of the whole world." The plan was audacious. It was insane. They would have to sneak into the most heavily guarded party in the territory and publicly accuse the most powerful man of being a thief and a murderer. "How?" Caleb asked. "It will be impossible to get in." Kem smiled grimly. "Thorne's men know your face, Caleb Wyatt, but they don't know mine, and they are not expecting a ghost from the past to crash their party." He looked at Maisie. "My sister, Morning Dove, was a beautiful singer. She was scheduled to perform at a similar town celebration the night she was taken. Thorne's men will be expecting entertainment." A daring, impossible plan began to form. Maisie, the lost daughter of the tribe, would be their way in. She and Kem would pose as traveling performers. Caleb would use the diversion to get into a position where he could support them when the time was right. It was a suicide mission, but it was the only shot they had. As the plan was finalized, Caleb found Maisie staring out at the canyon walls, the locket back around her neck. "Are you scared?" he asked gently. She nodded. But my mother was brave. My father was brave. I have to be too. She looked up at him, her eyes clear and determined. They took everything from my family. From your family too. We have to make it right. He put a hand on her shoulder. This was no longer the frightened little cook girl from the saloon. This was a warrior, just like her uncle, a girl who had found her voice and her people. He felt a surge of pride so fierce it almost brought him to his knees. He looked at the locket, then at the girl wearing it. He had walked into a saloon to cure his loneliness and had stumbled into the heart of a war. Now he was about to march into the enemy's stronghold with a small girl and a handful of native warriors as his only army. And for the first time since Martha died, Caleb Wyatt didn't feel lonely. He felt alive. Prescott was a city drunk on progress and money, and Elias Thorne's gala was its high holy day. The Grand Majestic Hotel was ablaze with lights, the streets choked with fine carriages. Music and laughter spilled out into the night air. It was a fortress of wealth and power. Getting inside was the first impossibility. Kame and Maisie, dressed as humble traveling musicians, approached the service entrance. Kame carried a handcrafted flute. Maisie, a small drum. The guards, burly men in Thorne's employ, laughed at them. "No beggars tonight!" one of them sneered. But Kame was ready. He produced a letter, a carefully forged invitation for entertainment, using the name of a real musician who, Kame's scouts had learned, had fallen ill. The guards were suspicious, but the forgery was good. As they argued, Maisie began to softly tap her drum, a simple, haunting rhythm. Then she began to sing. It was a song of her mother's people, a melody filled with a sorrow and a beauty that cut through the noise of the party. Heads began to turn. Guests on the nearby verandas fell silent, listening. The guards, caught off guard by the unexpected beauty and the attention it was drawing, reluctantly waved them through, warning them to stay in the kitchens until they were called. They were in. Meanwhile, Caleb, using a different kind of deception, was already inside. He wasn't dressed as a rancher. He was dressed as a waiter, having persuaded one of the hotel staff with a fistful of dollars and a hard look to lend him his uniform and his place for the night. With a tray of champagne glasses held high, he blended into the chaos, his face hidden in the shadows, his eyes scanning the crowd. He saw Thorne, holding court like a king, surrounded by sycophants. He saw Sheriff Brody looking uncomfortable in a stiff suit, a man clearly out of his element and in over his head. And he saw Governor Hayes, a formidable-looking man with a stern face, trapped in a conversation with Thorne. Caleb's job was simple. Get to the governor's side at the precise moment Kem and Maisie made their move. He began to slowly work his way through the glittering crowd, his heart pounding a rhythm that matched Maisie's drum. In the cavernous hotel kitchen, Kem and Maisie waited. The head steward, a pompous man, told them they would have 5 minutes on stage after the governor's speech. "Keep it brief, keep it clean," he ordered, before bustling away. Cammy knelt down to Maisie. "Remember the plan. Sing the first song, the one we practiced. When you see Caleb move, you show them the locket. Tell them the truth." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Your mother's spirit is with you tonight, little dove." The time came. They were ushered through the ballroom doors and onto a small stage. The room was a galaxy of chandeliers and jewels. Hundreds of faces stared back at them. Maisie's breath caught in her throat. For a second, she felt like the small, invisible cook girl again. But then she felt the weight of the locket against her skin, and she saw Caleb, standing near the back of the room, give her the slightest nod. She was not alone. Keem began to play his flute, a soft, mournful melody that silenced the chatter. And then Maisie began to sing. It was the same song she had sung outside, but this time her voice filled the cavernous room, pure and clear and full of a strength she didn't know she possessed. It was a song of loss, of a stolen home, of a wandering spirit. The crowd was mesmerized. Thorne, who had been laughing with the senator, stopped, a look of vague annoyance on his face. He didn't recognize the song, but there was something in it that disturbed him. Caleb saw his chance. As all eyes were on the stage, he began to move, navigating the last few feet that separated him from the governor. He was almost there when a hand clamped down on his shoulder. He turned. It was Silas Kane, Thorne's enforcer. His cold eyes showed no surprise. "The waiter's uniform is a nice touch, Wyatt," Kane whispered, his voice a blade of ice. "But I've been looking for you all night." A pistol was suddenly pressed into Caleb's ribs. "We're going to take a quiet walk outside." On stage, Maisie saw it happen. She saw Caleb freeze, saw the look of grim resignation on his face. Her heart stopped. The plan was falling apart. Kane was going to kill him. Her song faltered. Keme glanced at her, his eyes urging her to continue. But she couldn't. Fear paralyzed her. Thorne, seeing the music stop, grew impatient. "Get them off the stage!" he snapped to a guard. This was it. They had failed. But then Maisie looked past Kane, past Thorne, and she saw Sheriff Brody. He was watching the confrontation, his face pale, his hand hovering near the pistol at his belt. He had a choice. He could remain a pawn, do nothing, and let a good man be murdered, or he could finally be the lawman he was supposed to be. Their eyes met across the crowded room. In that split second, Maisie did the only thing she could. She stopped being a singer. She stopped being a victim. She took the locket from around her neck, held it high for the entire room to see, and pointed directly at Elias Thorne. "That man," she shouted, her voice ringing with the clarity of truth, "is a thief and a murderer. He killed my parents. And this," she held up the locket, "is the proof." The ballroom erupted. Thorne's face went from annoyance to purple rage. "Lies! Get that filthy child out of here!" he roared. Kane, distracted by the outburst, momentarily loosened his grip on Caleb. It was the only opening Caleb needed. He slammed his elbow back into Kane's face, grabbed the pistol, and shoved Kane into a table of fleeing guests. At the same moment, Sheriff Brody made his choice. He drew his weapon. "Nobody move!" he yelled, his voice finally finding its authority. "Let the girl speak!" All hell broke loose. Thorne's private guards moved in, but Kem and his warriors, who had slipped into the ballroom disguised as guests, suddenly appeared, blocking their path. The ballroom became a standoff. In the center of it all was Maisie, standing alone on the stage, holding the truth in her hand. Governor Hayes pushed through the chaos, his face a thundercloud, and strode to the stage. "What is the meaning of this? What proof do you have, child?" With trembling hands, Maisie opened the locket. The tiny encoded map and the journal entries were more powerful than any weapon. As the governor, the sheriff, and a handful of other stunned officials examined the evidence under the ballroom's bright lights, the story unraveled. The stolen land, the fraudulent claims, the trail of bodies, it was all there. Elias Thorne, seeing the net closing in, made a desperate move. He pulled a derringer from his coat and grabbed the nearest person as a shield. It was Maisie. He pressed the pistol to her head, his face a mask of desperation. "It's all lies!" he screamed. "Let me walk out of here, or the girl dies." But he had made a fatal miscalculation. He had forgotten about Caleb. A single shot rang out, louder than all the shouting. Not from the sheriff, from Caleb. He had circled around during the chaos. He didn't hesitate. The bullet struck Thorne's arm, causing him to cry out and drop the derringer. It was over. Keem's warriors subdued Thorne. Sheriff Brody, his face set with a new resolve, placed the man in cuffs. Silas Kane was found and arrested trying to slip out the back. Justice, swift and brutal and public, had finally come. In the aftermath, as the glittering guests were ushered out, leaving the ballroom in stunned disarray, Caleb rushed to Maisie. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight. "Are you all right?" She nodded against his chest, her body still trembling. "We did it," she whispered. "We did it." Governor Hayes approached them, the locket still in his hand. He looked from the evidence to the small girl and the rugged rancher who had protected her. "The territory owes you both a debt of gratitude," he said, his voice filled with respect. "The Thorne Empire is finished. His land claims will be nullified. Your people's land will be returned," he said to Keme. He then looked at Caleb and Maisie. "And as for you two, what will you do now?" Caleb looked down at Maisie. His ranch was a pile of ash. He had nothing to go back to. But as he looked at her, he realized that wasn't true. He had everything that mattered right here in his arms. "We're going to rebuild," Caleb said, his voice steady and sure. "We're going home." The journey back was different. They didn't have to hide. They rode with Kime and his people, honored guests. When they arrived back at the valley, at the blackened patch of ground where Caleb's house used to be, they found a miracle. The townsfolk, led by a deeply ashamed and grateful Sheriff Brody, were already there. Piles of fresh lumber sat waiting. Neighbors who had once looked at Caleb with pity and at Maisie with suspicion now greeted them with helping hands and open hearts. The story of their bravery had spread like a wildfire. They rebuilt the house, bigger and stronger than before. Keme and his people, now secure on their ancestral lands, helped, their songs mixing with the sound of hammers. The two communities, once separated by fear and prejudice, began to build a bridge. One evening, months later, Caleb and Maisie sat on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset paint the sky. The barn was full, the air was peaceful, and the house was filled with the smell of Maisie's baking. She had finally perfected her biscuits. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Papa," she said, the word no longer hesitant or frightened, but as natural as breathing. "Yeah, Maisie," he answered, his heart full. "I'm home," she whispered. Caleb looked out at the land, his land, her land, their land, and he wrapped an arm around his daughter. He was no longer Caleb Wyatt, the lonely rancher, and she was no longer the cook girl. They were a family, forged in fire, and bound by a love that had proven stronger than any fear. They had faced down the most powerful man in the territory and won, not with an army, but with courage and the undeniable power of the truth. This story shows that even in the darkest of kitchens or the loneliest of hearts, a single act of kindness can ignite a revolution. It proves that family isn't just about the blood you share, but about the people you'd fight for. If you were moved by the story of Caleb and Maisie's fight for justice, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button for more stories that remind us of the strength of the human spirit. And let me know in the comments below, what was the most shocking twist for you? Until next time, stay safe out there.